Yeah, I've been saying for some years now that what we call the agrarian crisis has gone far beyond the agrarian. It's a societal crisis affecting far more sections than just the agrarian. It is, in some respects, a civilizational crisis when the largest body of smallholders on earth are struggling for survival, and when smallholders all over the world, and by the way, every third or fourth human being who works is still connected to agriculture. So, in that sense, you're talking about a civilizational crisis. It's also, it's not just so much about, it's gone way past the point of how much production has been lost, and even beyond the thing of the numbers of how many lives have been lost. These are very important, but it's gone. It's, there's also the question is how much of our humanity have we lost? Yeah. It's a crisis of our own humanity that we have. Make no mistake about it. We are okay with it. We have accepted. There has been no outrage, really, no great protest over the fact that well over 310,000 in official count farmers in this country have killed themselves between 1995 and 2015. And since 2016, the government of India has stopped the National Crime Records Bureau from publishing farmer suicides data. So all the stuff you read in your newspapers is a lot of bullshit about how many suicides took place. The fact is, the National Crime Records Bureau has not published a figure for any state. So where are those numbers coming that you read in your newspapers? Maharashtra said yesterday, Maharashtra announced in the assembly that 12,021 farmers had committed suicide in Maharashtra in the last 4 years. Where did that number come from when the NCRB is not anymore publishing counts? The number comes from the revenue department, not from the agriculture department, not from the police thanas of the state, which is where the data used to go to the National Crime Records Bureau. Why revenue department? Because the trouble with all these idiots committing suicide is that you're going to have to pay some compensation to the family. So who better to keep the numbers down than the revenue department? So the farm suicide numbers are coming from there. They're coming from revenue departments. This is the kind of situation you're in. When worldwide, farm suicides continue. In India, they continue and they're growing, but we have no mechanism for counting them. Well, let me tell you what the government of India did with the National Crime Records Bureau and why that problem came up that they decided to shut down the numbers. This happened, by the way, both with UPA and NDA. But what the UPA does, the NDA does on steroids. Right? Mr. Arun Shourie once said very wisely that the BJP is Congress plus cow. and I think that the NDA is in economic policy is the UPA on steroids. So they started fiddling with the numbers when Mr. Sharad Pawar was agriculture minister. An agriculture minister who presided over the largest number of suicides of farmers anywhere in the world while maintaining the, while retaining the title of farmer leader. So in 2013, when the numbers were absolutely obscene, the government started looking at ways of reformatting the questionnaires, reformatting the issues that the National Crime Records Bureau would collate. How are farm suicide numbers or any suicide numbers calculated? Every police thana, every police station, say in the district of Wayanad, any district in the country, but let's take Wayanad, it's been a high suicide area in Kerala, and notwithstanding the recent elections, the suicides have resumed and are continuing. Now, every police station in a given district at the end of a year files the data not just on suicides but murders, robberies, crimes, atrocities, everything. It files these in a sheet, in a folder, and sends that to a body known as the District Crime Records Bureau. Then every district in a given state, like say Kerala, will file all its district crime data to a body known as the State Crime Records Bureau. And all the states in the country file their data to what is known as the National Crime Records Bureau, from where you get 2 reports annually. Crime in India, so that's what you get every year, you still get it. Crime in India tells you rapes, murders, assaults, whatever. That's one thing. The other report is called ADSI, Accidental Deaths and Suicides in India. That's where farm data was introduced in 1995. Now, as the numbers got up, so please understand that the National Crime Records Bureau, the figures it publishes are like a census. They come from every police station in the country. Anyway, the numbers started getting bad. So the government cracked down. It became too embarrassing. They changed the methodology. First thing, when you change the methodology massively, as the NDA government did in 2014, was that you cannot compare the data with the preceding 19 years. You've changed the methodology, the data are no longer comparable retrospectively. Then they changed the data so cleverly, it was really stunning, that essentially on a sheet of paper it ends up about where do you hide the corpses. So you take them out of farmers, where do you put them? You put them in newer categories. And of course, every table has a column called others, right? So this others column is a wonderful thing. Farmers' suicides fell by 50% in 2014. Of course, it had to. Mr. Modi had come to power. So farmers' suicides fell, that column fell by 50%, and the others column went up by 128%. In Karnataka, farmers' suicides fell by 60%, and the others column rose by 245%. So then we point this out that there's total chaos. Next year they changed the methodology again. So it's further impossible to calculate anything. Then this got so embarrassing. What do you think they did? Not many people know, and your newspapers don't tell you. Now your channels, who haven't a clue about it, they shut down the National Crime Records Bureau. This is the achievement of this government. It closed the National Crime Records Bureau. It shut it down in 2017, August 2017. In 1 year, it shut down the National Crime Records Bureau. Now what happened? 10 months, so who was to do the numbers? They shifted it to an organization called Bureau of Police Research and Development. The BPRD is a small thing that has no connections to the vast network of police stations. It outsources some studies and sample studies. Shifting this whole exercise from NCRB to BPRD is like cancelling your general election and holding a opinion poll as the determining authority on which way people are voting. Now they did this and then they found that it harmed them very badly because they had no information on anything. So believe it or not, 10 months after the NCRB was shut down, they had merged the NCRB into BPRD. 10 months after shutting it down, they revived the NCRB. So the NCRB rose like the phoenix from the ashes of the BPRD because the government found that just to kill farm suicide figures, they had killed an enormous amount of data that they needed. So they revived the NCRB but did not allow it to publish farm suicide figures. That's where we are today. Now, I want to talk about this question of the loss of humanity because you are a group of filmmakers, film buffs who are here. What are the kinds of things that we could be doing, that we should be doing? One is apart from looking at the manipulations of governments like the NCRB, I think it makes a fantastic story. The first time in history, a major department of the Home Ministry is shut down quietly, reopened even more quietly 10 months later, and in the meantime, 40 to 60,000 people at least may have committed suicide in the years lost to the data. It probably makes a thriller if you look at, because we're talking about deaths, murders, killings. Because make no mistake, several of those who have committed suicide, almost all of them, felt compelled to do so. It's not that they wanted to. It's not that they set out with a career goal of committing suicide. Now, look at this loss of humanity. Explore the kind of arguments that are coming up. One of the things that's been promoted for a long time is, and by the way, is a gift to the pharma companies. One of these arguments, and that really, for me, the loss of humanity is in the fact that we are willing to listen to these people seriously and consider their stuff seriously. The farmers had nothing to do, the suicides have nothing to do with crisis. They have nothing to do with economic factors. They have nothing to do with any of these. The argument is that farmers are committing suicide because of deep and acute depression. What a revelation. They're committing suicide. Every suicide is committed in a mood of depression. I have no knowledge of any suicide committed in joy, and happiness. Obviously, every person who commits suicide has experienced depression. Now, there are two ways you can go from there. You can examine what were the causes or the drivers of that depression. That's the way I would go about it, and I suspect most of you would. The other way is to medicalize the depression, make it a disease. Farmers are suffering, depression. Treat them with what? It's a boon to big pharma. I must say though that the Indian Association of Clinical Psychiatry and the Indian Association of Psychologists both in 2010-11 took very good positions. They opted for the idea of what are the drivers, because they, how do I know this? Because I was invited to deliver the keynote lecture at the both associations annual conference. And the fact is that they called me because they understood that they were not going to be able to create counseling sessions for people whose life experience they had no knowledge of. So when the government of the state in Karnataka and India asked these associations to create guidance and counseling modules, they felt the need to understand the economics behind it. There's another group that is neither psychologists nor psychiatrists who have been pushing depression as a disease theory. It doesn't explain why only farmers catch the disease in such large numbers. Why not accountants? Why not CAs? Yeah? Why not CEOs? How is this disease floating around that affects only particular occupations and sections? It's fascinating. A lot of such bullshit has been propagated. One of the oldest is alcoholism is the reason for the suicides. Yeah. All these farmers, you won't believe how many big and knowledgeable people have told me this so confidently. These guys are all drunkards, excessive consumption of alcohol. Now, there is no doubt in our country or most countries that alcoholism is a serious problem. But is the consumption of alcohol the exclusive preserve of farmers and farm labor? I was asked this, by the way, by a leading journalist who has worked 25 years in Vidarbha, in Nagpur, suggesting the extent to which his journalism went outside of Nagpur. I was asked at the Vidarbha Union of Journalists, this was a decade ago, and a very experienced journalist asked me, isn't it a fact that all these fellows are committing suicide because they're drunkards? They drink so much they kill. Now here was a group, huge group, about the same number of people as you, all journalists sitting in that audience. My answer was, if excessive consumption of alcohol is the driving factor behind rising suicide numbers, damn it, there would be no journalists left in the world. And very few academics. And no human rights activists at all. And I think precious few filmmakers. Okay. So let's, I think that I would ask people to engage with this kind of inhuman and inhumane approach to our fellow beings. Another favorite, Mr. Chandrababu Naidu's personal contribution to this debate. They're killing themselves for the compensation. By the way, something like 14-15% of those who commit suicide actually have received compensation. Maharashtra claims 50%, and I take some credit for higher figures in Maharashtra. But that 50%, that is 50% of their numbers of suicides, not the actual numbers. Because Maharashtra has started, for the last 12 years, has been dividing suicides into multiple categories. One of the most wonderful to my mind is what they call genuine suicides. And another category called eligible suicides. That is, you are eligible for compensation. Now, this is like eligible bachelor or eligible, bride or whatever. So, They had a column called uh, Farmers Suicides, Farmers Close Relatives Suicides. Because you can't recognize women as farmers, right? More than 60% of work in agriculture in your country, my friends, is done by women. But how do you accept that women are farmers? Their names are not on the patta. So, by the way, women's suicides in farming are massively underestimated. I'm saying there are thousands of elements here for people to go out, think about, write stories on, make films on, make documentaries on. The sheer Kafkaesque nature of how all the negative elements of our society, of gender, caste, class, all of them get mixed up into us ignoring what Jaideep said correctly was the greatest wave of recorded suicides in our history, perhaps in all human history, if you take just one occupation. And on the other hand, there are other things to also explore here. Last year, 2018, a fantastic thing happened, and I'll stop with that. Okay. In 2018, March 2018, the basic issue. Now, if you look at your media, there are only two things that come up in connection with farmers' protests, in connection with farmers. One is MSP and loan waiver. That's all the farmers are about. MSP and loan waiver. If these two issues are tackled, there's no problem. And loan waiver, all these guys, all that these fellows want is to be irresponsible and not repay loans. Please understand something. The subsidies given to all of us sitting in this room are far greater than anything given to farmers, to society in general. What do you think your housing loan and EMIs of the past decade were? You think that they were market rates, or do you think they were subsidies? Please do a little work and find out how these worked for you. I find it wonderful when I'm standing before an audience in IIT and IIM, and asked about subsidies. There you have in those audiences the most food secure, highly subsidized creatures in the subcontinent. IITs and IIMs. And they're worrying about subsidies. Will they pay the actual value of their education? For 50 years, the Indian state, 70 years, the Indian state has subsidized their medical education, where all the subsidies poured into that medical education benefit the people of the United States. For the rate of departure of your doctors to other shores. Now, why did this issue of loan waiver come? All those of you who are above the age of 40 will remember today is 2019, where in 1998-99, was there a single demand by a single farmers organization for a loan waiver? Please go back and look at the media of 98-99. Nobody demanded a loan waiver. Why did they start demanding a loan waiver from 2008-2009? It's not as if this was the only issue. They started demanding loan waivers when the credit system that worked for farmers for 40 years was dismantled, and that credit was diverted towards the corporate sector. There used to be two forms of financing of agriculture in this country: direct finance and indirect finance. Those were the two forms of credit that the banks gave farmers. Direct finance meant the bank gave the farmer directly in her hands or his hands, they gave them that loan. Indirect finance meant through the institutional structures, maybe through the cooperatives, maybe through some uh, public input, provisioning, whatever. Over the last 25 years of neoliberalism, direct financing began to shrink and indirect financing began to grow as neoliberal economic policy in India reshaped our budget. Mr. Chidambaram, Pranab Da, Arun Jaitley, all of them will tell you we doubled farm agricultural credit, we trebled agricultural credit, and they are telling you the truth. They're telling you the truth. They doubled and trebled agriculture credit. It just didn't go to the agriculturist. By increasing the share of, they increased the share of indirect finance to include input dealers, all sorts of non-farmer people started getting the credit meant for the farmer, especially corporations. Now, when you shifted this money, the farmer suffers a credit crunch. It became so embarrassing that in 2014 or 13, the government simply removed, RBI simply removed the category direct and indirect, so that it all got concealed in one ocean, so that you couldn't know how much was going, but you can, but you still can. How do we know how much money is going where? Now, everyone sitting in this audience knows NABARD, right? You're all familiar with NABARD? Yeah. So are the farmers. NABARD in the state where I live, in Maharashtra, NABARD's figures for the last 3 years are very revealing. NABARD is the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. Agriculture. Every year, NABARD for every state in the country puts out what is called a PLCP, a Potential Linked Credit Plan, which will lay out the blueprint or the guide map for disbursement of agricultural credit in that state. 2017 Maharashtra, which is 55% rural, which is a large farming state. In 2017 Maharashtra, 53% of all agricultural credit NABARD allocated to Mumbai city and suburbs. This is not it's not a secret. It's not something we got out in an RTI or it's published in their report. And when asked, they defended it. Now, how many agriculturists do you know of in Mumbai? All those poor, struggling homesteads of Malabar Hill and Cuff Parade. Now, I don't know. And the other way of finding out where the money has gone is by looking at the size of the loan. A loan below 50,000 rupees, a loan below 2 lakhs is to a small farmer. A loan between 2 and 5 lakhs is considered to be for the medium-sized farmer. Above 5 lakhs, it's considered to be for the big farmer. Between 2000 and 2010, in that decade, loans below 50,000 collapsed to less than half of what they were, which tells you that small farmer, marginal farmer, was not getting loans. Now, which are the loans that increased? Which are the loans that increased, doubled and trebled? Loans above? Any guesses? 5 lakhs? The loans that doubled and trebled were loans between 10 crores and 25 crores and above. 10 and 25 crores. How many small farmers do you know, who told you, hey, today I'm going to pick up my 25 crore loan at the bank? I know a couple in Mumbai One is called Anil and the other is called Mukesh. And, and now there's a third called Baba. And now there's a third called Baba. So here's the point. There are no agriculturists in Mumbai, but there is agribusiness in Mumbai. And that's why NABARD defends what it did. It defends the diversion of credit from the agriculturist to agribusiness. So you squeeze the farmer out of credit, he or she goes to the money lender. Typically, a loan, every farmer has 4 or 5 loans, okay? One from the National Bank, one from the Cooperative Bank, 3 from different money lenders. That's how it works, because that's the only way you're able to make things happen. As this policy grew, even in the first decade of what we humorously call the reforms, between 1992 and 2002, the number of farm households in that decade who were in debt doubled in this country because of this diversion of credit. And you tell them not to ask for a loan waiver. But there are much bigger issues involved. As I said, last year, a number of groups came together and started looking at what are the demands the farmers should have. Farm groups, spearheaded by the Kisan Sabha. And something fantastic happened in 2018 that gave us that hope, that gave us a sense that you and I can make a difference. You and I can do something. In 2018, March, 40,000 of the poorest farmers, Adivasi farmers, people who don't have a patta, people who can't prove that they own the land and therefore cannot get bank loans. 40,000 Adivasi farmers in the heat of Maharashtra, at that time 38 degrees exactly, and touching 40 degrees in the open hills. 40,000 of them marched from Nashik to Mumbai, 182 kilometers in 6 days, to take the city of Mumbai by storm and corner the government of Maharashtra and make them accede to their demands. Something spectacular happened, which is what I'm telling you about. That's right. The farmers marched the first 170 kilometers. Now these are really poor farmers. 90% of them had no footwear. They came with their feet bleeding. They came 68-year-old women carrying 8-year-old or 5-year-old grandchildren or great-grandchildren. They came marching to Mumbai. On the night of March 11th, they reached the inner perimeters of the city. Yeah. And look at where the humanism comes from, or the humaneness. They marched and they were exhausted, feet bleeding, cut up, heat stroke conditions for some of them. So they were to rest that night. And morning 6 a.m., they were to march to the historic venue of India's freedom struggle, Azad Maidan. And they would march across, that means they would march across the city at 8, 9, 10 p.m., the main sections of the city, 8, 9 or 10 a.m., and reach Azad Maidan by 12 noon. That night, these poor people sat down and had a discussion amongst themselves and said, we will not march in the morning, we will march now, and we will march silently so that we reach by 6 a.m. You know why? Why they took that decision? They were exhausted, completely burnt out, but they decided to walk the remaining 12, 15 kilometers that night. when they were, because they learned that March 12th, the next morning, lakhs of children in Mumbai and surrounding areas would be appearing for their board exams, and the farmers did not want to disrupt the children's exams or the traffic, and they did not want to disturb the children at night. So the spectacular sight of 40,000 people marching in darkness across Mumbai without a single slogan, without a single sound. They marched that last 12, 15 kilometers, disturbed no child. When Mumbai woke the next morning, there was no traffic jam. The children went, wrote their exams, and came back. Talk about being humane and human. This is what those farmers did. When I asked Rukma Bai, the leader, you'll find her dancing at the front of, she's in her late 60s, dancing at the front of the march. Why did you do this? I said, I'm looking at your feet and wondering why you did that instead of taking rest. She said, our children also write exams, you know. Why do we want to disrupt the exams of these children? But something else beautiful happened, sparked by what she and her fellow farmers did. 36 years of living in Mumbai, for the first time, I saw thousands of middle class people, people like you and me, come to the Azad Maidan with food packets, with water packets. In 12 to 15 doctors of the JJ hospital left the hospital, came to Azad Maidan, set up a counter, and were treating. Nobody mobilized these doctors. We did not call them. Nobody mobilized them. They saw the scenes on TV and they came there to help, and they worked the whole day to see that these farmers' medical needs were attended to. As the march began, cabinet ministers of the government of Maharashtra said, we won't talk to these people, they're urban Maoists. When they reached Mumbai, because they started with some 12,000 people, when they reached Mumbai and there were 40,000 plus 10,000 middle class, the government caved in on all the demand in 4 hours. Yeah. There was something very telling for me that day. You know, I saw a businessman from Crawford Market come without a word, leave 1,000 pairs of chappals and start walking away. And I asked him, who are you? He doesn't even give me his name. Why did you do this? He said, I broke down and wept when I saw them marching like that with bleeding feet. And he went off. Another fellow comes with his flunkies in a BMW with 3,000, 5,000 sachets of water and is distributing them. That day I saw lawyers, young lawyers, people some who had not completed their course but were, interning with somebody, all of them coming out of the Bombay High Court, which is next door, asking us, can we file a PIL against the Maharashtra government? You can't treat human beings this way. Bank employees and insurance employees unions came there. In hundreds and hundreds of activists came there to distribute food packets, water packets. That day, students, teachers were there in very large numbers. That day, I looked for the first time in 20 years of covering the wretched agrarian crisis. I saw doctors for farmers, lawyers for farmers, teachers for farmers, businessmen for farmers, vendors for farmers, unions for farmers. That day, my friends and I, we saw a nation for farmers. And in November, that became an actual middle class platform. No farmers are members of Nation for Farmers, but there are groups, techies for farmers. There is no group, filmmakers for farmers. Okay? But there are though artists for farmers. Many theatre groups are part of Nation for Farmers. They have formed groups called Artists for Farmers. In November, one of the most representative marches was held in Delhi when farmers, well over a lakh of farmers, came from 21 states in the country and took their fight all the way to Parliament Street. Despite that area being banned for rallies, they just said, we're going to sit here until you let us go there. And every major political leader had to come and speak on that platform and support their demands. The point is, and you know who were the volunteers for that march? Hundreds and hundreds, maybe well over 1,000 to 2,000 students of the universities of Delhi, JNU, Ambedkar University, Indraprasth University, and Jamia Millia. They were all having exams. Many of these first-year political science students of St. Stephen's came to receive farmers because they were coming from 5 different regions, routes. They came to receive the farmers at 4 a.m. at Nizamuddin and Anand Vihar, ran away at 7 a.m., wrote their exams at 10 a.m., came back to serve food to them at 1 p.m., 2 p.m. 100 plus doctors participated. The most crowded counter in the Ram Leela Maidan was not the food counter, it was the medical counter, because that is the reality of your rural India. The greatest expenditure today is health expenditure, and for the last 10, 15 years. And we are more and more privatizing what little remains of the health sector in the public domain. So there's hope and there is despair. The despair claims those lives. But when people begin to protest and assert their rights, to my mind, that's a step away from the despair, from the abyss of suicides. Who will tell these stories? Who will tell all these stories? By the way, for those of you who will make non-fiction short films, we have a platform, it's called the People's Archive of Rural India. We have circulated those bookmarks to you. We publish in 13 languages. We're a volunteer-driven, idealism-driven media platform. Yeah? We do pay our contributors as much as we can, but we are not a corporate media which will never ever give you the platform for that kind of work. Yeah. So there's hope ahead. There are stories to be told. There are storytellers sitting in this audience. But that begins with the recovery of our humanity. It begins with, for a storyteller and a journalist and a filmmaker, it begins with that element of empathy that makes us go out and look at the everyday lives of everyday people. Thank you.